Welcome everyone to our Zero Carbon Mine webinar. This meeting we're having Dominic talking about renewable electricity. Dominic's from Zenith Energy, and he'll run through a bit of a preso, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions out there. Sure, people are right to jump in if they've got questions along the way, Dominic.
Yep,
so
that'd be great.
Any further ado, I'll sort of throw it over to you. If you can share your preso and we'll get on with it.
So good morning. Just a quick introduction on myself. I look after or responsible for ESG and stakeholder engagement here at Zenith, which means I have carriage of the decarbonisation strategy for the business and other metrics around ESG, predominantly for the mining sector. That the top handful would be decarb, traditional owner engagement, gender diversity, and anti-modern slavery. Zenith decided when I joined in January of 21, and the reason I joined was because they had committed to a decarbonisation as a strategic differentiator for the business, and that was my responsibility to help the organisation to develop a strategy and embark upon that. So today I'll walk through a little bit of what that strategy is and how we've progressed to date and what the future holds in terms of getting to 2035, which is the target that was set back in 2022 for us as a business. As you can imagine, we are tightly tied to the customers who we have and their ambitions around net zero as well. We can't achieve net zero unless our customers or the customers we choose also want to be net zero. So that has a big part in our BD strategy and selection of customers. But anyway, the strategy had three components. Basically, one, to be the ESG enabler where we operate, and to do that we've undertaken a lot of change in the business, including a transparent annual audit process performed by an international organisation called GRESB. We were ranked this year third among 25 peers globally, so that certainly put us on the right path. We've also won some international awards around the IPP space for our ESG program back last year with the Asian Power Awards. So that's great, I guess, recognition for us in the work we've done to try and transform the business and give it a focus around decarbonisation predominantly, but also those other factors I mentioned a little bit earlier. The second was to be the market leader in reliable, cost-effective, high-fraction renewable hybrid power solutions. When I say high fraction, that basically means anything above 60%. Our current benchmark is an 80% renewable energy fraction. Just to define that term, that effectively means the amount of megawatt hours or energy that is consumed at a mine site will come from that fraction of renewable energy. So, and I'll talk to you about a couple of case studies that reference those numbers that we're achieving. So since 2021, and probably after we committed to the net zero 2035 objective, Zenith has contracted and has constructed most of Australia's off-grid high fraction renewable energy hybrid power systems. So it's amazing what a target and an ambition can achieve. We've been very fortunate, I guess, I think the timing was ideal post-COVID. Certainly a lot of miners looking to perform, particularly the target customers that we had, wanting to perform well in the decarb space for the markets where they operate, and to attract debt and equity. So the timing was good. The third point was to lead innovation and industry collaboration. Unfortunately, the technology is not quite there at the moment for us to be able to get to a net zero today. So what we've needed to do is participate in predominantly industry collaboration to work towards solutions that will allow us to get there, hopefully by the end of this decade, so far as then we can scale those technologies across our portfolio between 2030 and 2035. The first one of those industry collaborations was the Electric Mine Consortium, which was a group of mainly mid-tier miners, but there were some larger ones in there, South 32, IGO, and others, and companies in the supply chain of those miners. And I'll talk to one of the case studies that kind of speaks to one of the outcomes that we were able to achieve through that participation. We're currently involved with the Minerals to Megawatts CRC, which is a industry and university collaboration looking at similar technologies, or certainly for the projects that we'll be involved in, that will help us get that, what I call the last lap, that last 15% that we can't currently achieve with bulk renewable and energy storage. And also we are an industry partner for a WA funded, state government funded entity called the Green Tech Hub, being run out of Curtin University with industry, and that's supporting predominantly startups here in WA in the decarb space to commercialize their technology. But the outcome of that strategy has been that we have become the preferred IPP for tier 1 investment grade miners, and that's really important for our private equity shareholders, that our counterparties, and for our banks, that our counterparties are tier 1 investment grade miners. And we have been able to now also achieve the status of by installed capacity, the largest IPP. When we started this journey back in 21, we were probably the smallest of the 3 major IPPs in Australia, and by installed capacity we would be the largest now. That's a pretty quick acceleration in growth over the last few years, absolutely. So it's been a great journey. A little bit of growing pains, as you can imagine, as always, but we've gone from kind of 80 staff to over 250 in 3 years. So it's been a significant growth curve. The reason I think that we have achieved that status with kind of investment grade counterparties has been they hold equal, if not more ambitious net zero goals than us. In one of my case studies, Bellevue Gold, I'll talk to that. The regulatory incentives, the safeguard mechanism, CBAM, ASRS are all elements that I think have a greater influence over tier 1 investment grade miners than those that aren't. And so hence it kind of facilitates the conversation and the ambition that they have for decarbonisation. Those miners typically tend to have longer mine lives, and the basis for an economic return from high fraction renewable adoption tends to be where you can achieve longer tenure, and either the resource life or the mine life has that capacity to be able to provide that runway to amortize what is a high capex investment over a longer period. And the fact that a lot of our newer customers are future-facing battery mineral mines that are supporting the energy transition means that they're also keen to have renewable energy power their mine sites as part of the story for their commodity. Lastly, as I mentioned at the start, ESG selection criteria, typically in the tendering process. So, although interestingly enough, most of our, in fact, currently our 2 major large growth projects are both bilateral negotiations rather than a tendering process. But over 21, 22, 23, the tendering process tended to focus on scoring or having in a high weighting for their selection criteria, decarbonisation, DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, with a particular focus on First Nations and anti-modern slavery, all of which we were in a good position to respond to. Once we set the target for a net zero, Brett, I'll just stop there. I'm not seeing any hands, but if you do see a hand, just can you shout and let me know, and I'll stop and you can read me the question.
Yep, not sure will.
Cool. So when we set 2035 as a target, we had to come up with how are we going to get there? What does the glide path look like? And we produced this document. It's a little bit dated now, but in its entirety, it still lays out the steps that we saw that would be required. We had an interim milestone for next year, now 2025, that we set back in 2021, 22, to achieve a 20% reduction in our carbon intensity. That's the tons of CO2 per megawatt hour that we generate in our portfolio. That target was set on the basis that we thought we could deploy enough bulk renewables, that's bulk wind, solar, and storage, traditional storage for smoothing, into the portfolio to get to that target. And we contracted enough last year in order to meet that target for 2025. So we were chuffed with that outcome. And what that has basically meant is that we decreased the running hours of our diesel and natural gas power generation in our legacy sites, but also when we deploy greenfield operations with the ability to run engine off, which is a case study I'll talk to again in a second. But that meant we could operate a mine site continuously on renewable energy, initially for 9 hours where we had only solar, and now for up to 16 hours continuously where we also have wind as part of the mix. The next kind of step was to deploy long duration storage, and also have some redeployment technologies as part of our asset base, because mining does have a limited life. Our assets, typically wind and solar, have a much longer life. So the ability to redeploy them and or mitigate the risk of having stranded assets has meant that we've ultimately now ended up focusing quite heavily on using 5B, their Maverick redeployable solar mounting system, in so far all of the, well, except for the very first one we did back in at Nova, but all of them are now the 5B redeployable PV systems to allow us to achieve that flexibility, apart from the other benefits that it provides, including much lower cost and much faster mobilization and demobilization, the ability to add to it as ambitions grow to further decarbonize, but also the reduced amount of waste and the fact that you need only very few people to deploy, which is very helpful during a construction phase of a new mine where accommodation is an issue. But that was the second step, is to start looking at what technology we could use to eliminate effectively the curtailment or spillage from wind and solar, and further reduce, if not eliminate, the use of the firming fossil fuel. The next bit, to get beyond 40 and closer to 80% across the portfolio, we were looking at those legacy sites that may still be part of the portfolio that probably we're looking to not necessarily deploy significant amounts of renewable because of the mine life issue, and also to help us with effectively a storage mechanism that was easier probably is the best word, for us to be able to transport, store, and use for long durations. And to us, that probably is going to be a molecule of some description. Unlikely, probably in our opinion, that it'll be something like green hydrogen, although that is a molecule, but more likely to be some kind of sustainable fuel or carbon-free fuel, whether that be a biodiesel or a synthetic diesel or a synthetic gas. And we think the supply chains that exist for that would facilitate a much quicker adoption in our sites. The big handbrake on that at the moment, obviously, is the diesel fuel tax rebate that makes the cost competitive nature of those fuels difficult to stack up. There are, in fact, a lot of international companies developing sustainable fuels in Australia, but ironically to sell into export markets rather than to sell into the Australian market. So that's something we're working on currently with a group of miners and Climate Works to look at what we might be able to do to help policymakers come to a realization that for us to get to net zero completely, that could be a very valuable tool. There are obviously significant increases in the utility of batteries, and whereas we would have gone for smoothing applications of lithium batteries, we can get sort of 4 or 5 hours of storage from lithium at a very affordable and cost-effective price. So that is changing the dynamic significantly as well, and certainly allowing us to get increasing levels of penetration and reduce levels of curtailment, but it doesn't solve the long duration storage, those long periods of drought of either wind or solar, and certainly seasonal storage impacts of a well above what we require generation of green electrons in the summer months typically, and a significant and ironically enough almost equivalent number of deficit of electrons, green electrons, in the winter months. So that's where we think the green molecule will end up playing a part, and a lot of the work we're doing in terms of collaboration and joint research within industry partners is the development of that as a solution. But also, it's become apparent that in parallel we can, and it's not on this plan, but it's something that's become more apparent to us in probably the last 18 months, is where we have co-located or geographically in proximity close islanded operations, the ability to interconnect them and then join them to an existing grid. That's very difficult, obviously, in WA with the size of the land mass that we have to operate within. But we have a large concentration of sites in mines in the goldfields, and the goldfields presents an opportunity, and I'll talk to that at the end, for us to interconnect and use a network solution essentially to help bridge the last gap of that 15% that we haven't been able to achieve to date and get us to a net zero outcome.
Dominic, just got a couple of questions that have come in on that slide. I suppose the first one from Andrew was about the long duration storage, like what sort of technologies you've been looking at for that.
Mm-hmm. So at IGO Nova, and not necessarily as a result of what we have initiated, but because of the Future Batteries Industry, CRC, there were two technologies that were piloted as part of our energy system at Nova. One was a NAS battery, NAS, or sodium sulfate is the chemistry for that. And a vanadium battery was the other that both are still in situ in that site. Unfortunately, really tiny, as in kilowatts, as opposed to megawatts. And I certainly am of the view that the next type of pilot, or I wouldn't call it pilot, I would call it commercial deployment of a technology, will be at scale. But nevertheless, the NAS battery and the vanadium battery have provided lots of learnings in terms of how we need to integrate those kind of solutions into a network, into an island system. Those are the two. As part of the Electric Mine Consortium, we did do a market study with a number of different technologies, including gravity storage and others, all of which potentially have a part to play. But those two that we've ended up trialing at Nova certainly provided the lowest levelized cost of storage.
And there's another question from Ed around wind turbine redeployment. What approach? I'm not sure, you sort of briefly touched on that, but I'm curious here.
Yeah, listen, good question. And that was one of the when we were looking to adopt 5B. There was also a project to look at effectively a relocatable wind turbine. In the end, that proved difficult because the OEMs had limited appetite for it. And the technology provider, which was a company out of the UK, whilst the technology looked good, the ability for us to get an OEM, and the only OEM that's providing wind in the mining sector currently is Goldwind. Whilst they don't manufacture the towers, the ability for them to invest effort and time into looking at the technology was limited, if straight out not interested. So that was difficult. And the ability for us to avoid the stranded asset risk for our wind turbines is now focused on the interconnection between different islanded sites and back to the grid, which I'll talk to in a slide in a minute.
Yep. Yeah, no, definitely plenty of questions coming through, Andrew and Ed, but curious around the feedstock for your syn fuel? Like what sort of?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, good. So when with the word bio in it, that's obvious what that would be. And there are two companies, two major suppliers, both of which are over east. One's in Victoria, and one's in Queensland. There have been a couple of attempts here in WA to try and establish that as a production facility. BP are obviously doing that. They've only this week got approval for their Kwinana facility. For them, their objective is to generate aviation fuel, sustainable aviation fuel primarily. But so that's one feedstock, and I think that's mainly canola, if I remember correctly. The other is waste. Typically, waste to energy provides a synthetic gas solution or a synthetic diesel solution. Again, that the technology to do that does range, but probably the one that's most promising is a pyrolysis technology. And pyrolysis can, as I said, produce those two types of synthetic fuels, diesel and as a liquid and gases. And we predominantly use gas in our fleet, so that would be of interest to us. But obviously for mining fleets and for one of our customers, Bellevue Gold, the ability to decarbonize their fleet before full electrification would be probably a biodiesel would be their primary interest.
Right. And last question before you sort of go on is like for your net zero goals, is it you considering scope 3? Is it just the 1 and 2 that you're looking at?
Good question. We're really unique because all of our generation emissions are classified as scope 3. So from the get-go, it would have been disingenuous for us to say we were net zero just based on scope 1 and 2 emissions, because they're very, of our total emissions, scope 3 accounts for 98%, and that's where all our generation lies. The reason for that quirk is because our power stations are situated on a mine site, and for NGER's reporting, the miners include the power station emissions as part of their NGER's emissions, so their scope 1. So their scope 1 emissions and therefore our scope 3. So our net zero target is across all emission types or scopes, and therefore probably a little bit more aggressive than most. Perhaps not real zero like Fortescue aspire to, because we believe that there probably will be some emissions at the end that we may need to offset, and we're constantly through scenario planning trying to re-quantify that. It won't be many, but it could well be a little tiny bit of our emissions, that the residual that we need to offset.
Right. Questions keep coming, but I'll let you get on.
Okay. I'm sure there'll be more, maybe some answers in these next few slides to some of the questions. So kind of decarb, or at least efficiency and reduce our environmental impact, has been a part of the DNA here at Zenith well before I joined. Our founder and executive chairman, Doug Walker, was the first to introduce gas engines predominantly into the mining sector with the use of the INEO Jenbacher engines. That was a big effort to effectively displace diesel, which was the predominant power station or stationary energy fuel type. And as I just mentioned before, we now have today our renewables account for, in terms of capacity, 40% of our installed capacity. Gas is about 45% of our installed capacity, and diesel about 14%. I don't know if all the numbers add up, but I think that from memory that's what they are. So we've had gas as the major fuel source for our portfolio for a number of years now, and being the most efficient gas engines in the market, they significantly reduce our emissions. And we have the largest fleet in the Southern Hemisphere of these Jenbacher engines. So that was well before decarbonisation was really a thing. When it did become a bit of a thing, for want of a better word, Zenith was the first to actually deploy solar into a islanded or off-grid mine site. on a commercial basis. So you might remember DeGrussa, that was an ARENA-funded solar and battery deployment, and I think one of the, if not the first, one of the first of that kind, and certainly at that scale in the mining sector. Very soon after that, Zenith deployed, albeit modest, 5.6 megawatts of single axis tracking renewables at IGO's Nova operations, which was a diesel station. And they did that without any government grants or support or funding, and the first in the industry to have done that. And also the first to have done it without a battery, instead using high-speed, medium-speed, high-efficient diesel engines that could ramp up and down quite quickly, in conjunction with some cloud monitoring software that allowed us to maintain system integrity while optimizing the penetration of the PV. Probably not as much as you could optimize it, well, in fact, definitely not as much as you could optimize it with the battery. But at that point in time, back in 2018, when the contract was being negotiated, storage was just so expensive that we had to find an alternative to decarbonize that site. And we had a great counterparty in IGO who very forward-thinking and very ambitious around net zero. They, together with us, were a couple of the members in the Electric Mine Consortium. And through that collaboration came up with this next iteration at Nova, which was Engine Off. Engine Off was not a brand new concept. It does happen on islands, as in literally islands, where King Island, for example, and others, but never on a mine site. There had been a very tiny, as in a 2 megawatt power station, which had achieved effectively Engine Off, but certainly nothing of the size and scale that Nova required. So we deployed an additional 10 megawatts of PV using the 5B system. That was critical for Nova because it has a very remaining limited mine life, and in fact is scheduled to wind up in October of 2026. So only less than a couple of years left of operation at Nova. So we were able to deploy 5B there together with 10 megawatts of it of PV and a 10 megawatt hour battery, with both assets that we could pick up and relocate to a future site. So the outcome there being that we could achieve effectively running the whole operation. It's a 20 megawatt power station. We could run the whole station purely on PV and battery for up to 9 hours, daylight hours, obviously, and in the peak daylight hour months, so over the summer period. And that was a great period of learning for us to be able to synchronize the operation of the battery together with, we added in synchronous condensers for stability of the grid, and to make sure we had enough inertia and reactive power so that we wouldn't experience any blackouts, essentially, in the event that even though we had grid forming inverters and the battery, in the event that the battery and the grid forming inverters couldn't supply that. So it was a belts and braces approach, but not an expensive, but rather an affordable belts and braces approach, which we've replicated in every design since. Because of the limited mine life and the need to relocate, there was a shared risk, shared reward PPA negotiated that made the project bankable for both parties. We shared a lot in the upside of the diesel savings, and IGO shared in some of the risk of committing to relocate those assets to another of its sites at the end of the life of Nova, essentially. And it certainly demonstrated at the time that there was no reason not to insert solar at every off-grid mine site in Australia. The next milestone for us really, and that happened very quickly, and as context, I'll just talk to when I joined in January of 21, the expectation amongst the business was that no miner would accept a PPA with greater than 20% renewables. One, because of the cost, and two, because of the risk, and three, because there was very little drivers to do so. Within 9 to 10 months of that, and after locking in the Nova project, We secured the Liontown Kathleen Valley project, which achieved a 60% renewable energy fraction. So in less than a year of what was the common, I guess, paradigm, was that high renewables wasn't going to be an option, and we were able to negotiate a contract with Liontown. And the drivers for that were all the ones that I mentioned up front on the first slide. So they had demonstrated mine life. They had a commodity that was tightly tied to the energy transition, and the markets they wanted to sell into were important for them to achieve this. So Liontown, or the Kathleen Valley Power Station, is now the largest hybrid high fraction renewable energy power system in the country. It's a 95 megawatt power system, and it has the largest off-grid wind farm, which is 30 megawatts, which are 5-6 megawatt Gold wind turbines. The largest land-based wind turbines in Australia currently. We were the first to energize those. And that system can run the whole mine site for up to 16 hours continuously on 100% renewable energy. In fact, because Liontown hasn't quite ramped up to their full load, expected load, they're averaging kind of 11.8 to 12 megawatts. We have been able to run them continuously for 5 days with renewable energy. And since COD, it's been about a 98% renewable energy fraction. So that's not what we expect. We expect that we will achieve a minimum of 60% once they're up to full production. But certainly the system and the ability to operate on 100% renewable energy for, in our case here, 5 days has been a tremendous outcome. That system integrates, and it was our first wind integration. So we've got 30 megawatts of wind, as I said, 17 megawatts of PV, 16 megawatt hour battery, and LNG is the firming fuel. And diesel there does exist, 5 megawatts, I think, for Black Start. Another important part, not so much for decarbonisation, but certainly an enabler for decarbonisation, was the traditional owner engagement. And just to give you an example, there was a lot of work done with Jawal, who are the traditional owners there, in terms of the layout and design of the wind farm to minimise disturbance of the land. And it's the first, if not the only, wind farm design where we don't have clearing across the whole area, but rather have left vegetation in between each of the turbines, which is not normally the case. So, and the location of the turbines obviously had to avoid sacred areas and maximize the wind, obviously. So there was a lot of work done together with the Jawal native title holders in the Northern Goldfields, and certainly has been a positive outcome for the mine, for Liontown, and for our power system. This project really was a catalyst for us. We've subsequently contracted and have constructed a retrofit of wind, solar, and battery at Northern Star's Jundee project. We have completed the deployment of solar and battery at the Bellevue Gold operation, which is about 10 kilometres south of Liontown, with wind scheduled to be deployed there in January of this year. And we have commenced construction on the Lynas Rare Earths, again, high fraction renewable energy power system, basically a replica of Liontown at their Mount Weld operation. So this Liontown system probably was the tipping point, I think, for Zenith definitely, and probably for the off-grid mining sector in large part, that has seen a real continuous flow of those systems being contracted and constructed in the last couple of years. I won't worry about that video. Now it's just the wind turbines being taken off the ship at Geraldton. But the next milestone probably is Bellevue Gold. So whereas we've designed Liontown to be a minimum renewable energy fraction of 60%. Bellevue has a minimum guaranteed renewable energy fraction of 80%. That is probably going to be closer to 85%, but the cap of what we can achieve commercially and in terms of providing a cost-effective solution. Hence the need to find what I call the last lap solution through a molecule or some sort of long duration storage. But like Liontown, it incorporates all three elements, significant amounts of PV. It is the largest, albeit still only small, in terms of 27 megawatts of PV solar farm in an off-grid environment. All of these largest words, even though they sound impressive, will be very quickly surpassed in subsequent projects, I have no doubt. So, but nevertheless, they are the enablers, paving the way for much bigger installations. But the 80% comes because of the wind. There's 24 megawatts of wind at Bellevue, but there is a tremendous amount of, when I say tremendous, there is probably more than we'd like. Curtailment of the wind particularly that will be required, and hence the interconnection becomes a real valuable option for us, not only to help them grow their renewable fraction, but to also eliminate, hopefully, or if not, further optimize the use of renewables. Like Liontown, we have run without the wind, in fact, Bellevue for days at a time on just the solar and battery. So in the daylight hours, so that has been a great outcome for us there as well. So in terms of the next steps and achieving a net zero power system, both islanded and hopefully through the use of interconnection of our islanded sites, what we need to do is to effectively eliminate as much as we can the curtailment or the spillage of the renewable energy, and we need to be able to do that. Our hypothesis is that we need a systems approach where we can adopt shared infrastructure. And that shared infrastructure won't just be the network solution, but it'll also be the generation and storage solution. So effectively, rather than having everything built behind the meter, which provides security of supply and greater control for the miners, rather having shared infrastructure that can allow them to economically scale their operations without needing to also over invest in behind the meter generation, particularly the renewable component. A system solution kind of, will allow the regions to operate independent of, but also provide energy services that will be sought by established grids. And in Western Australia, our main grid is the SWIS, the South West Interconnected System, which starts in terms of where we are located regionally in the goldfields at Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie is a regrettably third world power system, and every summer has an outage because of a 220 that fails in the heat. And the ability for us to provide great, particularly wind resource from the northern goldfields where Liontown and Bellevue are located, and bring that down to Kalgoorlie and to effectively improve, if not provide, security of supply and reliability of power to Kalgoorlie, and then onwards provide green electrons into the Swiss, is an ambition that EPWA, Energy Policy WA, certainly have articulated and now part of the policy for the state government. And we believe that connecting what they call in the Goldfields Regional Network from our sites, the Northern Goldfields, down to Kalgoorlie will provide significant benefit to the Swiss as well as to the miners who will be interconnected and can scale their operations without needing to commensurately spend on additional renewables. And that will help us with our last lap issue. So the component parts of a system solution, which includes shared infrastructure, would deliver the most economic deployment of utility scale renewables and storage. The interconnection of existing assets is possible because of their close proximity. We wouldn't be able to interconnect sites that are obviously thousands of kilometers apart from each other, but there are certainly hubs that are in our portfolio that could be interconnected. And then the optional transmission to connect those hubs into an existing network. Together with some form of green molecule are our focus to get the last lap run.
But,
sorry,
Dominic,
go ahead.
Just one question, like the interconnection, bringing all the renewables together. Is that, I don't know, is it the world, I suppose, beyond Zenith, is it the desire to make that happen? I suppose there's lots of stakeholders that you need to get involved to sort of, make that a reality. Is that sort of something that's, wanted?
Great question. And that's exactly what this slide answers.
Okay. Yeah.
So the beneficiaries are a number of different stakeholders, not the least of which are the traditional owners, who all desire to have some meaningful participation in the energy transition. And obviously the GRN, this Goldfield Regional Network, which will end up being a 450 kilometre approximately transmission line connecting the Northern Goldfields down to Kalgoorlie, will traverse 3 different TO. A couple of them are native title determined, a couple aren't. Sorry, 1 is and 2 aren't. But each of them are certainly focused on having a material, meaningful participation in and keen to have an ownership component of any future transmission line that traverses their country. And that will certainly provide them with economic and other benefits, as well as the bringing to their country and their communities grid connected power and eliminating diesel from those locations. Second, the competitiveness of what is almost a misnomer now in the Goldfield. It should be called the critical mineral fields, because the number of battery minerals and future facing minerals that are being mined and or exist in that area all need to be decarbonized as part of their narrative, but also to achieve lower cost. I didn't mention anywhere, but we are delivering a much lower levelized cost of energy through these high penetration or high fraction renewable systems than we could with just diesel or gas. So whilst it might be, I've mentioned a lot of the kind of other reasons it's important, the economics still actually has been critical to the adoption of these high fraction renewable energy power systems. Fourth, energy security and reliability, hence the local government there and the community in Kalgoorlie are very keen for this, and cost-effective delivery of decarbonisation, which both the federal and state have ambitions to achieve, and bringing what is a great renewable energy resource from the Northern Goldfields down into the Swiss has been the prime driver for government to sponsor and get behind this initiative. Does that answer the question, Brett?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thanks.
Go on. You don't sound convinced.
I suppose it's just the will from the broader the governments, and I suppose are you dealing with the existing grids, or are you sort of it's all going to be standalone?
So it'll be a private transmission line between Kalgoorlie and the Northern Goldfields, and it will interconnect obviously to the Swiss, but EPWA or the state government have consciously made a choice not to allow the existing network operator and owner, Western Power, to be part of the solution, simply because they just haven't got the capacity, which is a great thing, because that lack of capacity means they don't have any capability really to deliver the solution in the short to medium time frame.
Thank you. That's good.
That's all I had. So over to questions.
Yep, I think there was probably a couple I missed, but there's one in the chat about the 5B. Have Zenith found 5B suitable for deployment in high wind region zones?
Yes, yeah. So the 5B solution is now cyclone rated. We haven't deployed them in any cyclone rated locations. We haven't got any operations up in the Pilbara or close to the coast where those issues exist. We will have in the future, but at the moment we haven't had a need for that 5B solution, but it has been rated to operate in those environments.
Okay. So if anyone else has got any questions, like put them in the chat or yell out. Seeing there's one from bit back there. Yeah, there's one. How do you identify what renewable energy, mix of techniques or technologies is best for a particular mine site? Ensure that you can scale up for more, usage.
Yep. So, solar is a bit of a no-brainer. It's the easy one. There's no reason why we can't deploy solar. The question is, and with battery, the question is wind going to be feasible at a particular location? What drives that decision often is tenure, the ability to recover that capital over a minimum 15-year period. And in the absence of that, is there other risk mitigants to the stranded asset issue? In the Northern Goldfields, there's a Transalta line connecting Nickel West's operations. So that kind of provided, in addition to the contract life we've negotiated, some support for wind in that region. But if it's a very remote site and there isn't mine life or an ability for the miner to contract for at least 15 years, wind tends to be not part of the solution. So then we would be relying on the development of some sort of green fuel or green molecule to supplement solar and battery.
Yeah. So that the wind is a high capital sort of element. Your solar is probably a bit easier and more flexible.
Correct.
So it can be more easy to redeployed. Yeah.
That's right. And so to the part of the question around scaling, for instance, we have gone hard on wind in both Bellevue and Liontown, knowing that the scaling of their renewable energy fraction is going to come from solar. And because the 5B solution is very easy for us to mobilize, it's a much more cost-effective thing to scale, and we don't need to do a lot of extra work. It doesn't cost us any more to mobilize additional PV with the Maverick system than it did compared to wind. The amount of mobilization cost to get the crane to site, the transport, that is a significant cost by comparison to the PV. So the scaling will typically come from PV, whereas our foundation kind of coverage of renewable fraction will come from wind.
Right. Okay. Anyone else out there have any last questions? Sure I haven't missed anything. I suppose you're always keeping your eyes out for, evolving technologies in the storage space to see what, I suppose you've got to make sure they're robust and, reliable and all that sort of thing. But seeing what is.
It's good. We are an R&D company, so we don't do research and development. So we need to kind of cover that off, and the industry collaborations and participating in the CRC kind of facilitates that lack of R&D that we have the capability to do, and they will certainly provide us enough real life testing of different technology types to prove what we deploy before, to make it bankable for us essentially.
Right. Yeah. No, there's been a few different technologies sort of shared that are probably different stages, but I'm sure you got your fingers in all, checking out what's going on in that sort of space to make sure it's applicable. But yeah, if there's no other questions, I might just sort of wrap it up. But I'll just sharing that to say thanks for sharing that, Dominic. It was
pleasure.
Quite informative. I learned a few things. It's not normally something I get too involved in, but no, it's great. In 2 more weeks, we've got another webinar coming up on the EPCA's fully electric 100-ton truck, which will be an interesting one. So yeah, tune into that if you're interested. And we're also, so far these webinars have been sort of a bit of a personal project. So always looking for support, sponsorship, whatever, to make them sort of more sustainable. So financially. So if anyone out there is interested, businesses or whatnot, please get in touch. I suppose there was just last question from Andrew. Have you considered any of the flywheel storage technologies?
Flywheel.
Yeah.
No, we haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose I'm sure there's plenty of different technologies out there, and I take it that they need to be probably proven to a degree before you would sort of take them on.
Yes and no, but certainly before we would deploy them at any location, there would be there would need to be so many stakeholders that would be happy with it, not least of ours, our technical guys, but they would need to. We would tend to be what I'd call fast followers rather than early adopters.
Right. No, makes sense. All right. Thanks again, and yeah, hope everyone enjoyed that, and I'll stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Cheers.